Okay, what if the entire balance of power in the AI world could flip completely in just 2 years? Today, we're going to walk through a really fascinating hypothetical story of how the tech landscape gets redrawn practically overnight. In the world of AI, progress isn't this slow, steady climb. It's more like a series of earthquakes, huge, massive leaps that change everything. And this story, it's about one of those leaps.
So, to really get what happened here, you've got to know the players. On this battlefield, two absolute titans were locked in the struggle for the future, and each one had a completely different playbook.
So on one side, you had OpenAI. They were the agile disruptor, right? The ones who just blew everyone away and captured the world's imagination with ChatGPT. And on the other side, you had the established giant Google, armed with literal decades of research, its powerhouse lab DeepMind, and just an insane amount of computing power. The stage was set for a truly epic clash.
But here's the thing. For Google to really get ahead, just playing catch-up was never going to work. They couldn't just build a slightly better product. They had to change the entire game. It was time for a complete strategic reset.
Their master plan basically had three core parts. First, they did something huge internally. They broke down the walls between their brilliant but separate teams, DeepMind, Google Brain, and Gemini, and smashed them together into one single super division. Second, they leaned into their biggest advantage, their hardware. They optimized everything for their own custom TPUs, which meant they could build models way faster and cheaper than anyone else. And finally, the third piece, they threw open the gates to their massive ecosystem, turning things like Android and Chrome into a giant, ready-made platform for AI developers to build on. So this new, unified strategy, it didn't just make things run smoother. No, it led to a massive technological leap forward. This was the engine that was going to power Google's comeback.
So what was the big deal with Gemini Ultra 4? Well, it was natively multimodal. And look, that's just a fancy way of saying it didn't just learn from text. It understood images, audio, and code all at the same time, from the ground up. It could even debug its own code. But the real game changer? It was incredibly efficient. It could run on tiny, localized chips right there on your device, making it super fast and way more private.
And that right there was the magic trick. AI was no longer a destination, It wasn't something you had to open an app for. It just became this ambient layer that was integrated into everything you were already doing. It was just there.
But while Google was hitting the gas, OpenAI, in our story, started running into some serious headwinds. Their reliance on outside hardware meant that every new user actually cost them a lot of money to support. And without a built-in consumer ecosystem like Android, getting their AI onto billions of devices was a much, much tougher mountain to climb. And this brings us to the real turning point, and it all comes down to a single, absolutely mind-boggling number, 1 trillion. That's the cumulative number of devices Google could potentially reach, a scale that just completely dwarfed the competition. And that scale became a reality with a model called Gemini Nano 5. This thing was so efficient it could run offline, on your phone, in your car, on your watch. It was private, it was instant, and it was suddenly everywhere. And just like that, Google's AI became the default layer for pretty much the entire world. But here's the crazy part. Even as Google was dominating the consumer world, they had another project running in the background, something way bigger, way more ambitious, and it was a complete secret. So what was this secret weapon? This wasn't something designed to just make your apps a little smarter. This was built to completely reshape entire industries. It was called Project Atlas. And let's be clear, this was not another chatbot, not even close. Atlas was a specialized model built for deep, complex reasoning. Think of it less like an AI assistant and more like an AI research scientist.
Yeah, Atlas wasn't built to help you write an email. No. It was built to optimize the world's energy grids, to discover new life-saving proteins, to model climate change with terrifying accuracy. It was designed to solve the biggest, hardest problems humanity is facing.
So, when you combine the two, Gemini's AI being everywhere you look, and Atlas's power to change industries, the result was a seismic shift in the global market. The world of AI had been completely remade.
And the numbers really tell the story. By the end of this 2-year period, a staggering 70% of all global AI queries were running through Google's systems. That's not just a lead, that's dominance. And this really shows you how the platform war played out. Now, OpenAI still carved out a super strong and valuable space with enterprise tools, for sure. But Google's control of the Android ecosystem, that secured the entire mass market, making its platform the undeniable leader.
But look, the real story here isn't about one company winning and another losing. It's about how that intense competition forces radical innovation and just pushes the entire field forward at a ridiculous speed.
And the outcome of all that was a world transformed. For the rest of us, it meant we got smarter tools in our daily lives. We saw faster scientific discoveries, we developed better safety standards, and ultimately, more people all over the globe got access to incredibly powerful AI.
You know, in the end, it really is like that quote says. Sometimes the tide rises slowly, and sometimes it just rises all at once. And for these 2 years, the AI tide didn't just rise. It was a full-on tsunami that reshaped the entire coastline of technology.
Now, of course, this exact scenario was hypothetical, a sort of what if. But the forces behind it, things like hardware integration, ecosystem scale, and building specialized models, those are all very, very real, which leaves us all with a pretty critical question to think about. What's going to trigger the next great power shift in AI, and who's going to be ready for it when it happens?